All right.
You were saying?
The Rosicrucian philosophy teaches that we have a general plan before we come to rebirth. It's a general plan in that not all of the specifics are written out, but only the major events and the major lessons that we have set before ourselves to learn are in that plan. That plan itself is based on an idea, a central idea that is in the region of abstract thought, and that is the idea of the creation itself. So our lives and the plan of our lives are miniatures of the idea behind the whole creation. The plan is a concrete thought form, not abstract, but concrete. And it's called a creative archetype. And it is the archetype of what our life is going to be like and all of our different bodies or vehicles of consciousness that we experience that life through. Now, most people are not adept at concentrated creative thinking. So most people get assists by various divine hierarchies that help us put together a life. It's sort of like when you're in a class and like a math class, the teacher gives you you follow what the teacher is doing, and while he's with you, you understand it. When you're on your own, you don't. And something like that is the way we are helped with creative thinking. Most people are slaves to their desires and their habits, and so for most people, their lives are pretty much destined. There isn't going to be a lot of new creative things happening to them. But anyone who is self-conscious is capable of at least a little bit of creativity and of doing something different, something unplanned for. Now, a horoscope is a representation of the archetype. It is a statement of all of the ripe destiny that we can live out in this particular lifetime. At the same time, since it is a creative thought, it is a statement of our creative intent, of what we're trying to bring out of the future. It is both then a history and a creative format, but it isn't exclusively either one of them. So it's not just a matter of fate, and it's not a creative pipe dream. There are moments, and whether one of those moments is when the spirit precipitates a thought, or when it makes its first action here, there is an event. The first action here is usually considered the first volitional breath that we take. That's the first action, and that's the first moment. Now, some moments or some events have a much longer duration. Obviously, the thought for our life is very long in its duration. Part of the reason it takes a long time for us to come back to birth is because we're such poor thinkers, and it takes a long time to think out a life. But the thought gets played out in action. And when there is a definite action, it becomes an event. And when it becomes an event, it has consequences. So a series of events are tied together, like links on a chain. But we know that the dimensionality of our life isn't just following a line that goes straight forward. It goes in all directions. So if we want to understand or get an image of the way life progresses, we have to have a better image than that of a chain. And the one that works well for me, though it isn't perfect, is a circular kiddie pool. You know, like the kind that kids wade in at this time of the year. And you take one of those and you put several inches of water in it, and you let the water stand and get still, and then you drop a stone right in the middle. And when the stone hits the water, at the moment of impact, that is an event. And if you watch, waves go out from that original impact. Usually there are several waves on the surface of the water going away from the point of impact. In the moments following, you can see 2 or 3 waves, and the first wave that comes out from the stone has the greatest amplitude. It has the greatest strength. The amplitude does not remain constant because it loses momentum, and it loses momentum to the friction that we call viscosity. And the waves continue off from the center of the kiddie pond until they hit the wall. And when they hit the wall, they rebound and they start coming back in until they meet the next outgoing wave, and then everything is broken up into turbulence. Now that image isn't perfect for describing reality, but it is an image that is very helpful for understanding the evolution of a horoscope as it begins with the moment of birth and what happens after birth. Obviously, the moment or the impact where the stone hits the water is analogous to the birth moment. Everything that is going to transpire, or the main gist of it, is already in that moment. There's a difference astrologically because the rings that come out from the impact at birth are not circular. They're the shape, the geometric shape of all of the aspects in the horoscope, but the circular idea is enough to get the idea. Speaking even more astrologically in the analogy, the events and the periods, the flavor of them after birth is no different than the flavor of the basic horoscope. In astrology, the natal horoscope, which is that first impact statement, the first activity spiritually, that is a creation of the spirit, is a statement of the character for this life. Even though the same flavor and the same characteristics carry throughout the life, there is nothing that is completely destined. There are new things. The image of the kiddie pool is not a good image because from the material world, working back inward toward the center of spirit is another source of waves. And so that there is a meeting of waves that produces the various events in our life. The things that come to us from without, that come to us from the larger universe, are things that are not completely under our control, and they give us opportunities for new creative activities. And so that we do new things, we change, and we become different from what we were before. So, we can't say that all of life is destined. The Rosicrucian philosophy is a Christian philosophy, and the biblical Christ says, "Ask whatsoever ye will in my name, and it will be given to you." There is no conditions There are no conditions placed on that. It doesn't say, ask whatsoever you will, except if you have Saturn in Taurus in the 12th house. You know, it's not whatever you want. However, sometimes the asking is very, very hard asking in order to make changes or to do something new. So, when things do become ripe, we can still live them creatively. And the horoscope helps us to understand how we can take the ingredients of life or the things that we have given to ourselves and how we can make something different and something better of them. So we're talking about ripe destiny. So what we want to do is look in a stopped action way of seeing what those waves are like. Because when something happens in a moment, it's over quickly. It happens so quick that you don't know what hit you. But if it gets expanded, even if it's thinned out a little bit, when it gets expanded into the waves and you can stop and look at each of those waves, you can understand life in a way that you can't from that brief instant that the stone strikes the water. Now, we're going to be describing astrological tools for understanding how things play out of the archetype, or how things play out of the spirit and into the world, and how the world makes its way into our lives. We're going to be looking at astrological tools that are not the causal mechanism directly. I had a hard time with this when I first started studying astrology. It seemed to me that the primary directions and the progressions and things like that were fakey. It seemed to be too much of an ideal system, and I didn't believe it. And I've been convinced begrudgingly that it does work. And I do have a better understanding of it. And that's what I'm going to try and share during the course of this week. I have tried all different kinds of systems and methods of understanding the waves as they come out of the moment of birth. And a lot of them are foolscap. A lot of them are things that people think are true but really are not. They're grasping. Instead of pondering on a few facts and going more and more deeply into those facts to have an understanding of each moment, what happens is that people look for a gimmick to give them a quick answer, so that they can, that they can impress people with what they know and how great they are at looking into the future. I find that some of those techniques sometimes work and sometimes they don't work. So I'm assuming that what they are waves upon waves. If you've seen waves on the lake where the big wave has little ones on top of it, and I think some of those kinds of things are happening with some methods of looking into the outpouring of the future of the horoscope. Now we're going to give the Max Heindel explanation about why the tools work. We have to have a little bit of an aside first. We have to qualify. This is called dynamic astrology because it is the astrology of things in action as life changes. And we're going to look at the evolution of a horoscope, how things work out of it. Dynamic astrology is the weakest part of astrology, and there are several reasons for that. One of the reasons is that we're dealing with pure unknowns. Some of the future is clearly decided, even some of the near future is clearly decided, but there are a lot of unknowns. We may be able to understand the climate astrologically that events are going to form in, but we don't know exactly what is going to come out of that climate. That is because between now and the future, there's a space that's pregnant with opportunities to change things. And as long as we are alive, we can change ourselves and we can change the world, and it isn't a fixed fate kind of activity. If we begin to assert free will, we'll make those changes. And then the symbols for what the climate is going to be will have to be interpreted differently, because we're going to bring different things out of them. Another reason why dynamic astrology is so weak is that there are very few reliable tools. Astrology itself is evolving very, very slowly. And when events occur, we become curious astrologically to understand the astrological cause of those events. And we work back to try to understand the source of them. And sometimes we're successful, sometimes we're not. And even if we do find a correlation, we have no guarantee that that same correlative is going to work the next time. If you think about it, every one of our thoughts, every one of our emotions, everything we do is recorded. And everything that we do builds into a form. And everything is accounted for. So every last little thing has to be carried out to the last detail. And this means that we're dealing with something enormous. If you think all the thoughts you have in a given day. So the agencies of destiny, the divine beings that help us to experience the consequences of our deeds, have all kinds of tools available to them. And the same consequence can be produced by various different causes. This is because it's not always the same. I can remember the old astrology books. I'll take an example of miscarriage. And the old astrology books would say, well, if you have Mars or Uranus in the 5th house, you're likely to miscarry, because sudden actions will cause a breach, and that will be the result of it. Well, along the way, there are other things that produce miscarriages, and they aren't just Mars and Uranus. One example is I had a friend that had a miscarriage, and it was clear that the symbols had to do with an affliction between Mars and the Moon. And it had nothing to do with jerking activity. What it had to do with was the acidity in the womb, and whether one could carry a child because of that. So we see right there that we have two very different symbols that can produce the same consequence. And then I worked with the horoscope of someone who had Jupiter conjoined Venus in Virgo. Now, how could a conjunction between the two most benefic planets of all, how could that produce a miscarriage? It did, because Virgo rules the abdominal area, and Jupiter and Venus are planets of relaxation. And what it was that there was so much relaxation in the abdominal muscles that the mother could not carry a child to term. And so you can see, in terms of miscarriage, we have three very, very different symbols that have the same consequence. And if we're supposed to learn something, destiny has millions and millions of tools that it can use to bring us just the experience that we need. Sometimes astrologers do find connections, and they do find reliable tools for making connections. I have a friend that belongs to the Los Angeles County or the Los Angeles Area Astrologers Association, and she tells me, do you go to one of those meetings and the complications that they produce mathematically to demonstrate things, she says it's almost unbelievable. And that's the way it becomes. The tools are almost not worth they're worth using, because they require so much work and so much time and so much effort, and then you have to understand the meaning of things. So that's a little bit of an exaggeration, but not so much. Max Heindel, and from experience I myself feel that a simple approach to astrology and focusing on the few most pertinent and important facts, the basics are enough. And if you focus on them, everything else will follow afterwards. You can always go deeper. From a few simple, basic ideas, you can go deeper and deeper into the horoscope and come to the spirit itself and understand what it's trying to do without spending all of your time in complex mathematics. Now, I don't use all of these tools a lot, but that doesn't mean that I don't know them. But there are various different degrees of knowing. Anyone can drive a car. You don't have to know about internal combustion in order to drive a car. If you know about internal combustion, you can drive a car better. But if you know, you still can't necessarily design an automobile that will function better. And so, all things that we use, all tools that we use are like automobiles. And astrological tools are no different from that, because according to them, we can go at various levels of depth and get more out of them. I don't use the most precise of all of the tools because I don't have to do that much predictive work. Now, if we take the first wave out from the impact of the stone, it represents a first stage of evolution of the expression of the divine being. That first wave out, the tool that represents that is called primary direction. It's a very mathematically complicated calculation. It involves oblique ascension and spherical trigonometry and quite a few other things to get it very accurately. Before computerization, very few people used primary directions, and they did so with very, very great labor. Almost all of the methods of the tools that we use in astrology are based on the apparent movement of the sun. And they involve the apparent movement of the sun through 360 degrees. And the idea is that each degree of the zodiac represents an opportunity, just like each year of life or each day of life represents an opportunity. So, if we combine several factors, we can get a method of dynamic evolution of a horoscope from the movements of the sun. The Earth has two very obvious motions relative to the sun. There is axial rotation, where the Earth spins on its axis, and there is orbital revolution, wherein the Earth goes around the sun. If we consider the apparent motion of the sun or any other planet according to the axial rotation of the Earth, we have primary direction. Now, the Earth rotates on its axis in 24 hours. That means to say, from any point you go all the way around the heavens, all 360 degrees in 24 hours. And 24 hours is 1,440 minutes. And that means we go through 1 degree of space every 4 minutes on the average, because it depends on where you're at and things like that. So, according to this then, this first wave out, the eternal now is the impact. The first wave out is where each 4 minutes after birth represents a year, which is cutting things pretty fine. It follows then that 1 minute of real time after birth equals 3 months in the future. And 20 seconds of real time represent 1 month. In this method or this tool for understanding the evolution out of the archetype, events are determined by the cusps of houses, because the cusps of the houses are a result of the Earth rotating on its axis. So when a progressed cusp reaches a planet, that usually produces an event. And it has, you can be very precision about that. Very precise, I should say. When a progressed cusp enters a new sign, the whole field of activity changes. And there's a whole new flavor. Now, according to this method, an entire life of 80 years, Plato would like 81 years because he was an Enneatic man, and 9 times 9 is 81. But an 80-year life can be seen in the 5 hours and 20 minutes after birth. Now, the problem of using this is immediately obvious. Very few people know their birth time to within a few minutes, to say nothing of having to know it within a few seconds. Max Heindel had very high regard for this method of looking into the future or the flowing out from the archetype, however way you want to look at it. But he did very little of it because it involved so much mathematics. You can overcome the problem of not knowing the time of birth, but it takes a lot of work. If you have a long list of events, or if you know the moment of conception, you can work backwards and you can get the time of birth to within a few seconds. The process is called rectification. There's always some guesswork in it, but it can become quite precise. There's John Hazelrig he was a very excellent astrologer as far as the mathematical side of things goes. This woman came to him and she wanted to work with her horoscope, And Hazelrig worked on it and worked on it and worked on it, and she came in and he said, well, you were conceived at such and such hour on such and such day. And she lit into him. And the way he said it was that a buzzsaw cutting through a log of a tree would sound like a melody compared to the way she was reading him out. She said, my parents were married that evening, and my parents are virtuous people. And what happened was the woman came back sheepishly a few weeks later, and because she said she had complained to her mother about the audacity of this astrologer, and her mother said to her, well, your father and I did have a dalliance that morning before the wedding. And so there are quite remarkable things that you can do. There are other problems with this tool that can be overcome, but they again require a lot of work. The thing about this is, Max Heindel tells us that this method of prediction or forecasting is from the world of thought. And so it's excellent for predictive accuracy. I haven't done much with it because I don't need to do that kind of predictive work. So, instead of working from the world of thought, we can work in a little bit different way. Working from the world of thought is like having a close-up or taking a photo and blowing it up and expanding it and getting all of the details. If we go out to the second ring, things are expanded more, but the intensity and the sharpness of the focus are not as strong. The second kind of, the second wave or the second tool is the one that Max Heindel used the most, and that tool is called secondary progression. And this tool is based on the orbital revolution of the Earth around the Sun instead of the Earth spinning on its axis. Now, these two methods are not mutually exclusive to each other. In fact, if you work together with them, you'll get a very good understanding. We're going to start doing that tomorrow, and the next day we're going to, I told you it's going to get pretty technical. You'll see that things do work together. Some things are more important from the world of thought. Some things are more important from the desire world, which is where the second method of progression works from. And some is equally important or highly important to both of them. Again, this method is based on single degrees of the zodiac. And in this case, the apparent movement of the Sun is the pacekeeper. Relative to the zodiac, that is, relative to the orbital revolution of the Earth, the Sun on average goes through 1 degree of the zodiac in 1 day. There are 365 days, and the circle is 360. Therefore, each day after birth represents 1 year when you expand it out to the second ring. Now, if we take an 80-year life again, that can be seen in primary directions in 5 hours and 20 minutes. But in 5 hours and 20 minutes, the moon has only gone 3 degrees or something like that. However, in a life of 80 years, in the 80 days after birth, all of the planets have moved significantly. Some of them have moved quite a bit. In primary directions, a cusp will move 80 degrees. That's almost one quadrant of the zodiac, so almost every cusp of the house will either be conjoined or opposed in cross quadrants. In secondary directions, Sun, Venus, and Mercury will pass through, on the average, more or less than 80 degrees. Obviously, the 3 planets passing through 80 degrees, and there are 10 planets they can aspect, this indicates that there are quite a few astrological events that can take place in life according to secondary directions. On the average, 240. Most people do not have 240 major events in their life, and so you have to do some weighing of events to see which are more important than others. I find that the progressions of the Sun stand out significantly stronger than progressions of Mercury or Venus, for example. Max Heindel tells us that the method of secondary progressions is the archetype as viewed from the desire world. And in that, Max Heindel follows Paracelsus, who was an early Rosicrucian thinker and a seer, in saying that the astrological forces are strongest in the desire world, which some people even call the astral world. So, the people who are looking for causality in electromagnetism are never going to find it unless they can learn to be a bit more subtle and go into the desire world. I found this to be true, and that the method of working from the desire world works extremely well. The signs in the zodiac are qualities. The houses are more mathematical designations. At best, they are abstractions from the signs of the zodiac, but the real flavors of things are to be found in the signs. And when we're studying character and we're studying the unfolding of a personality through time, we're looking at flavors. We're looking at the kinds of events that bring out different attitudes in people. And so, working from the desire world is maybe not as sharp as working from the world of thought, but it helps us to understand the psychology and get the flavor of the character. The image has been damped by viscosity by the time you get out to the second wave, but that's all right. It's enough so that you can get an understanding. All right. When a wave reaches the wall and rebounds, it strikes the next wave passing outward. What we're looking at with that is transits in dynamic astrology. Transits are not symbolic. Transits are the relationships between planets in the heavens at the moment, right now, and their relationship to the horoscope. The concept of transits introduces all kinds of things, more than we have time for. But transits are important if for no other reason than that they are the most used tool of astrology. In fact, a large number of astrologers know nothing about primary directions or secondary progressions. They don't do anything with them at all. As a result, if it's the only thing you know, it's probably given too much significance. And you're going to miss a lot in life if you don't have directions or progressions and all you have is transits. Now, if we study transits, it requires us to study ephemeral astrology. Ephemeral astrology is the study of what's happening right now relative to the earth, what's happening in the heavens and how it affects the earth. Meteorological astrology, where you look at the movements and positions of the stars and see what's happening in that moment in terms of weather and climate, that's a form of ephemeral astrology. Or if you look at the ephemeris and look at the newspaper, or at a history book, that's another means of studying ephemeral astrology. However, it's not as simple and as straightforward as it seems to be. For example, the planets in any given movement are involved in cycles. And unless you understand the positions of planets relative to other planets and the cycles that they share together, the understanding the ephemeral moment is not an easy thing to do. And there are many different kinds of cycles. And it's like earthquakes. Energy builds up and builds up and builds up, and then there's a release. And the release may come relative to a transit, but there are a lot of other transits that had to do with the buildup of that energy. So even looking at the astrology of transits is not a simple thing, and we shouldn't be too simplistic about it. When we look at ephemeral astrology, we come into one of the great philosophical problems that people meet all the time. It is nature versus nurture. Is there something in the very nature of something that determines things, or is it the nurturing that determines things? In reality, it is both. But various people come down on different sides as to which is the greater factor. We are in an ongoing evolution, and it is a creative activity. We do have a basic nature, and that basic nature is in the horoscope, and there are very definitely nature astrologers that say what you are is what you are, and this is the way you're going to respond. Other people will say, no, you can take two people with the same horoscopes, and by treating them differently, you will get different results. If we take the principle of analogy, as above, so below, what has gone before in heaven will follow after on earth. Know this and rejoice. There is a constant outwelling from the Spirit. But in response to that, there is something that Spirit leans toward matter, and matter raises itself or goes toward the light of the Spirit. And this is something that is ongoing all the time. What is coming from the earth back toward the Spirit, whether it's a result of a back wave or whether it is reaching toward the spiritual source, is what the transits are all about. When there is harmony between the progressions and the transits, that is when the Spirit within is trying to accomplish something and it is harmonious to what is happening in the world, this is when you have a person of destiny. That is to say, you have somebody that really wants to do this, and the time is ripe for it to happen. This is a destined kind of life. Now, most people don't have that fortunate kind of circumstance, so that what is happening with the progressions is in agreement with what is happening in the world. And to a large extent, understanding the relationship between the directions and progressions coming from within relative to the transits coming from without indicates the kind of compromises we have to make with the world. And so that's what we try to study when the transits become a factor that are brought into the general understanding that we are trying to come to. Basically, if you look in old-time astrology books written from about a century ago, or even older than that, they say that directions and progressions are what you do to the world, and transits are what the world does to you. That is a pretty crude definition, but it's helpful. It does help you understand what's going on. Obviously, since the without is the macrocosm and the horoscope represents the microcosm, the individual working its way out into the world, the transits indicate the situations of the world that the inner person has to adapt to and has to change the world or change self or change both. So there are outward influences and there are inward influences. In fact, even when transits occur outside, they bring up reactions to us from within. But the moment that we are living in is the meeting of the things that come from within and the things that come from without. Now, all of the transits, all of the planets are affecting us all of the time. But it appears that astrological influence is effective to the length of time that it is applied. And a transit, for example, of Mercury that may last only an hour is not going to etch very deeply. So, but for example, there's an aspect, an ephemeral aspect that all of us have lived all of our life under. Neptune and Pluto have been sextile for something like 60 years or something like that. And that the effect of that is great on all of us. So usually when you look at transits, you look at transits from Mars outward. And when you look at progressions, secondary progressions, you work with the planets from Mars inward. And that gives you a pretty good rule of thumb of how you can avoid having to spend a lot of time in things that are fruitless and having to do a lot of calculation. There's so much to ponder that with transits, it's probably best to work with orbs of 2 degrees or less. And with progressions, secondary progressions, it's probably best to work with an orb of 1.5 degrees. If you're working with directions, primary directions, you have to use very small orbs, but you have to be very precise. All right, this is a rough introduction of the idea of the life plan being worked out through time and being able to understand what of the basic character becomes ripe at what times after birth. And what we're going to do is tomorrow we're going to take one horoscope and we're going to look at primary directions for an hour like this. And then the next day we'll look at the same horoscope, looking at secondary progressions and relating the two of them together. And then on Thursday we'll look at transits in the same horoscope, and then we'll move on to something that rationalizes it all on Friday. And for right now, we will close with the Rosicrucian student's prayer. O God, increase our love for Thee, so that we may serve Thee better from day to day. Let the words of our mouths and the meditation of our hearts be acceptable in Thy sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Any questions on this? People weren't expecting that much. It's a school. It's going to be a lot of astrology, more than you want, probably. No questions.
What was that connection between something all of this?
What?
What was that connection that's been going on for 6 weeks?
Oh, it is Pluto and Neptune have been sextile to each other for approximately 60 years.
What does that mean?
I tend to think that it means that we've been saved from disaster by the influences of beings that are very strong in their capacity to keep us from destroying ourselves. Pluto-Neptune combinations indicate mastery, and I think there are powerful divine beings that are keeping us from, Okay.
Question.
Yes.
How long are they going to continue to be sextile?
I think another 10 years at least, because at this point Pluto is still going faster than Neptune. And so it has to catch up to the exact orb of Neptune and then go forward from there.
So most of the lives of most of us.
We are fortunate people.